Hello, welcome to the MOOCs course on software engineering. In this session, we will be looking at the responsibilities of a software project manager. Just to give you the agenda for this session, we will be covering on the contents like the role of a project manager as an overview. We will be talking about the various phases of the project manager's roles and responsibilities, which are initiation phase, planning responsibilities, execution and monitoring, closure and ethics, and finally we will be talking on the career preparation for the project manager. First we will see on the role overview. As you all might know, software is not about building with the help of a code, but then a software, it requires a collective experience of building code. Also, there is a team communication which is involved. There is an appropriate documentation which also get involved. But then managing this project is little more a tougher activity, and that has to be executed with an expertise. And this expertise will be given by a personnel called software project manager. Today we will be looking more on the roles and responsibilities of a project manager, but before that we will be talking about the project deliverables. Deliverables of a project, as you might very well know, that we will build an initial activity which is unique in terms of its characteristics, which has a definitive start and also an end. That is what is termed to be as a project. But then the project once gets developed, if it is for a purpose with a clear defined scope and an outcome, then it becomes a product, and with a specific case for which it gets developed, it becomes a software. But day-to-day operations of this project, once it happens, then it becomes a business. So initially any project that has to be conceived, it has to work for a very minimal period, and that needs to be unique as well. That will be a project, and over a period when we develop, it becomes a product and it becomes a collective responsibility. Say for example, for a university system, if you are creating a governance, the entire governance is being maintained by product, or which are connected amongst various simple projects that will make it as a very big software. And finally, when we operate on it every day-to-day basis, then it becomes a business. Now we are about to see the key areas of a software project manager. The key responsible areas of a project management are process methodology, resources, constraints or risks, quality or metrics. So these are the four key areas that needs to be maintained by a software project management team, most often by a project manager as well. When it comes to the project methodology, we will cover some of the very important aspects like initiating the project by understanding the key important components that needs to be developed for any project, and building a scope for the project, appropriate objectives wherein the project needs to execute. Then we will schedule. I will reiterate on one of the important terminology that we have seen in the previous classes. Any project that needs to be executed requires an appropriate time for it to develop. Also, that should be within the cost, and it has to maintain a quality. So three important things that we look at while developing a project: one, time; two, cost; and three, quality. So process methodology is something which will initiate on all of these three important factors. But in order to develop that, The first ever process methodology activity is initiate. So, we might have to understand the scope for the project, the objectives, whether it could be a generalized objectives or a specific objectives, that also needs to be understood. Once after we have done all of that, we will go for an activity called planning. And during the planning phase, what needs to be executed first? Then we will go ahead with saying what will come second. So, we will appropriately position all of the simple activities so that it executes in a specific order. So, initiation, planning, monitoring and controlling, executing and closing are the process that will be taken through while developing the entire project. So, the process methodology phases are initiation, planning, monitoring, controlling, executing and closing. But this is a very minimalistic phase and a very important phase as well. But then while we go on to building appropriate set of resources that are required for this project to get executed, we need software developers. Although we have quite a good infrastructure which is built in place, but then the development team plays an important role in terms of development of a project. So, software developer plays a very important role in developing these softwares. Most often with the software developers, we will work on the analytical side of these developers, wherein their left brain works. But today's generation, we always see more number of softwares, but then there can be certain level of creativity that gets involved, wherein we will make the software developers more creative, and people who have their right side brain also working will take an advantage in today's generation of software development, wherein we will talk more on the UI and UX design, user experience design, user interface and user experience design. So, this has typically changed the format in which things have been presented. So, the resources are the key resources that play a vital role in terms of development of a project are the software developers, where there will be appropriate quantum of creativity and the analytics. The third key area that we need to talk about for a software project manager or a management to happen is the constraints and the risks that are to be identified early during the project development phase. So, there are some critical and or contingent software which gets developed during that time. Either it might take a longer period for us to develop, or it might schedule over a different cost factor, or a quality might be of a constraint. Say for example, we are going for a critical systems development of building a rocket. So, in that particular case, certain softwares are also involved, and these softwares at appropriate time, if it does not work, what would happen? What are the consequences of these softwares not running at the right time? So, those are called a critical software or a contingent software. Also, we may have to look at every new releases. Once the product is about to launch on a specific date and time that is fixed very early during the phase of development, the new releases and the newer versions of software that needs to be built has to be given appropriate care. So, those are the major risk factors. Either existing software which has been run as a business over long, it requires a minor revision. That does not make a major impact because the earlier version is running. But then when it comes to a newer product development or new releases, we have to be very careful and we have to test it multiple set of times so that these softwares are run appropriately. Or the third point that we may have to give appropriate care is bug identification and bug fixes. Bugs are certain parts of error that happens while developing a code. And these bug fixes, if it has not been appropriately positioned, then it might create issues during the last 2 points that I have mentioned on the either new releases or a new version, or for building up a critical software. This might impact a lot of those things. And finally, whether it could be a new operating system or a firmware or an application software, many certain things that we have mentioned, there are appropriate quantum of risk and constraints that are involved during these phases of development. Finally, any software that has to be built, it for a quality purpose, we will have to check. Quality assurance is one of the important factor of any project management. So, the measure of quality is based on certain metrics. It measures the total quantum of defects, which in layman term you can easily understand if you have come across this management principle called Six Sigma or a Pareto principle. These things would signify how much of defects have been measured, managed, mitigated, or a systematic way to measure and track all of these defects need to be understood. So, these are mentioned as the key project areas which has to be given appropriate focus. Now, coming to today's topic, we will be mentioning that the role of a project manager in various terms. First, I will talk about the right hand portion of what you see. A good project manager requires variety of skills. These variety of skills includes various tools, various techniques, methodologies that they adopt. All of this would impact on the development of a software. Today, all of the scheduling mechanism, time understanding and cost constraints can be well understood, well received with the help of a tool. But then using a right tool plays an important role during the development of project. So, a project manager requires a variety of such skills to identify which tool is impactful. Not just that, a project manager also tries to organize and plan the work appropriately so that it is done concurrently for the entire phase of development. Also, it is delivered on time. The third thing that a good project manager does is he or she manages day-to-day activities, delivers the project to the client within the time, within the cost and within the quality. Also, he is the responsible person to identify the potential stakeholders who are appropriately using the software at right point in time. So, these are the qualities of a good project manager. But when talking about a project manager's responsibilities, a project manager is responsible for leading a team. He is a leader. We will talk about leadership. There are multiple leadership styles that are in place. One of the leadership that is more thought provoking with terms of agile practices, it's called servant leadership, where a manager will not typically take a role as a lead, as a boss of the entire team. Rather, he is also been serving as a servant. Along with the team, he will also be helping the team towards the development of a good software. So, leading the team is very important and a crucial opportunity which is given for a project manager. Not just that, he achieves project objectives which needs to be very clear as it is understood right at the beginning of the software itself. There needs a sequence of processes that will be executed. So, the responsibility of the project manager is to identify those processes and keep it appropriately. We will be studying this as a work breakdown structure. Once having understood all the work that needs to be get executed, the project manager aligns all these work at appropriate places and which process has to execute at what point in time, developing that at the right time also to be taken care. Finally, he is the person responsible of understanding and deliberating with the software developers, making the software developers know which is the software, which is the tool, what are the techniques that are required in order to make this successful. If you go back and reiterate in all of our lectures, I have been telling the way in which we have formatted on the software development well in advance during 80s, 90s, more than 61% of the softwares have been developed. Those led to failures. That was not the part of requirement because it has taken a very long time for it to get developed. But then today all of the softwares, since the understanding is very clear right at the beginning, the role of the software manager has become simple. So the objectives are clearly written, the scope and the vision for the software is clearly set, and the outcomes are mapped accordingly. So the first 4 points that I have mentioned as leading the team, achieving the project objectives, managing the project processes, applying the tools and techniques, which are very vital roles of a project manager. Now we will talk about the interpersonal skills that are to be developed for a software project manager. A project manager needs to have inbuilt qualities of one, a leadership. He has to be highly motivated and his communication has to be direct with whoever the stakeholders or the developers or the end users, whoever it might be. The communication needs to be very clear and concrete. And he is the person who is to develop the team. Also, he is the same personality who will be influencing the team, making appropriate decisions, negotiating with whoever their stakeholders are, building up trust, and finally understanding and solving the conflicts, conflict management, conflict resolution. All of these are the interpersonal skills that are to be built as a software project manager. If you consider early days, a person who has experienced say at least for 10 to 15 years of time in the industry, whatever industry it could be, only will be given an opportunity as a project manager. But then in today's scenario, right after their proper education, people are building themselves as an entrepreneur and they exhibit this project manager's skill. So a project manager certain skills that are required for a project manager are leadership, motivation, communication, team building, influencing, decision making, negotiation, trust building, conflict management. These are only very few of the skills that are very mandatorily required for a project manager. More than all of this, there are certain other skills which are also important for a project manager to be very successful in his career. Now, we will be defining the software project manager's position into any of the organization in 3 different terminologies. One as orchestration of elements, 2 his unique role distinctions, and 3 his balancing multiple aspects. When it comes to orchestration of elements, whether it could be technical or a business or the human aspects, the project manager has to balance himself with all of these integration in place. So whether a person talks technically in terms of the development of a project or coding or integration of multiple such works together, he has to contribute his place. Also, in terms of management of the business and in terms of conflicts between two different personnel, it is a responsibility of a project manager to take care of everything. And he has to integrate all of these to deliver functional software on schedule and within budget. So, what we should not forget as a project manager or as a software building personality is any software that has to be developed, three important keywords that you may have to remember is the project that is getting developed has to be within schedule, within budget, and to meet out the quality of the organization. So, this role is distinct from developers, scrum masters and product owners focusing on holistic project success. A project manager has to always distinguish himself from all these personnel like developers, scrum masters, product owners, and he has to build all of this holistically so that this project becomes more successful. Some of the unique role distinctions are, unlike developers who focus on coding or scrum masters who facilitate agile processes, the software project manager, he by himself oversees the entire project life cycle. We will be looking at all of the software project life cycle in detail. He will be managing the entire software life cycle, ensuring all components work together seamlessly. That is the very key of a project manager's responsibility. Also, he has to balance multiple aspects like projects not only meet technical requirements but also align with business goals and user needs. Many a time this has been forgotten. If in case a developer develops a product, he will be technically sound and he will be developing all of these softwares to match to the technical standards. But then it is the ultimate responsibility of the project manager to see that it aligns with the business goals and the end user requirements. So, this involves managing resources, timelines and stakeholders' expectations effectively. Looking after the skill matrix required for building a software project manager, he has to be technically sound. So, technical literacy. Also, he should be knowing appropriate tools and techniques which are required to match the schedule and the budget. Also, he has to exhibit the leadership and the motivation styles, and his communication has to be prominent. Also, he has to ethically judge what is right, what point if this executed will be right for the system, and in terms of managing the resources as well, what is right has to be rightly judged. So, ethical judgment is also one of the skill matrix that is required for a project manager. Now, looking at the core values of the organization, any organization that builds a software needs a minimalistic risk and a maximum return on investment. That is one portion of the core values that is required for an organization, where maximum return on investment by optimizing resource utilization and delivering projects on time within budget is the effective core value of an organization. But in order to meet those core values, it requires alignment with the business strategy as well. That has been given in the right-hand portion. A software project manager ensures that software projects align with the organization's strategic goals. This alignment helps convert chaotic development efforts into predictable and successful software releases, maintaining stakeholders' trust. How long we have been maintaining all the stakeholders is the typical role of a software project manager. Next, we will be seeing on the initiation phase, where as I have mentioned earlier, the prime responsibility of a software project manager is to understand the scope and fix up the project objectives. Also, he has to understand the feasibility. So, in order to scope itself very clearly, we need to define the measurable objectives, measurable, specific or general objectives. A software project manager translates vague project ideas into clear, measurable objectives. The ultimate goal of all of these objectives should lead to the success of the project. This involves defining the project scope, deliverables and success criteria to provide a solid foundation for the project. Not just that, its technical and market feasibility also has to be studied well in advance. So, we will have a small group of people who will give a feedback on how good it would be when it has been released. The technical and the market feasibility also needs to be studied. So, we will take a feedback of that well in advance. The feasibility checks not just assesses the technical viability of the project, also the market need for the project is well understood. This ensures that the project is not only possible, but also relevant and valuable to the target audience. The responsibility of the project manager to continue forward is to understand and identify the appropriate stakeholders. So, the mapping of stakeholders plays a very important role as a phase of project manager. Comprehensive stakeholder listing, we will identify what type of stakeholders they are, whether they could be sponsors, end users, developers, regulators and suppliers. They are very crucial for the software development. This ensures that everyone who are interested in the project are accounted for the development of the project. Also, this project would create a lot of impact when it is released. Say today's generation, they are completely dependent on the large language models like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Claude, and by seeing the interest of all these users, they have developed this kind of a software. Analyzing the interest and expectations of stakeholders helps in understanding their needs and potential conflicts. Also, it requires a communication channel through which the entire of the software is communicated to the outside world. So, defining an effective communication channel ensures that the stakeholders receive timely and relevant information, and this also helps in managing expectations and maintain stakeholder satisfaction. We have looked at two phases, initiation phase and scope phase. Now, we will be looking at the planning responsibilities of a project manager. So, when a project manager has to plan himself very correctly, the project, although it is understood from the beginning phase till the outcome, but then in between there can be multiple small granular divisions, which we call it as work breakdown structure. So, entire software is broken down into certain list of tasks that we have included as task decomposition, which actually breaks down deliverables into manageable tasks, which helps in understanding the project scope at a granular level. Also, after having broken down all these group of activities into smaller tasks, we have to identify whether this is doable at what point in time. So, we have to make an estimation technique which is reliable and predicts the time and effort required for each task. And the third important activity of a work breakdown structure is to baseline the schedule. So, when it should start, when it should end, the baseline of the entire work has to be completely scheduled. So, this depends on defining the dependencies. So, identifying the dependencies between the tasks is so crucial that it finds its appropriate place and accurate for scheduling as well. This ensures that the tasks are completed in correct order of execution, avoiding delays and bottlenecks. Resources and budget planning. Resource forecasting. Forecasting human effort, hardware, licenses and travel ensures that all necessary resources are available at the right point in time. This also has to be scheduled well in advance. But you can ask me a very good question. How can we plan all of this right at the beginning of this software development itself? Yes, we may have to do that with appropriate tools and techniques, but then this may not go as planned. If it goes as planned, I think you're a super engineer, super project manager. But then we have to ensure at least more than 80% of the times this plan has been met. Then this has to be appropriately converted into a budget. Converting resource estimates into a detailed budget plan helps in securing approvals from the stakeholders. Sometimes the entire project gets either scrapped or the cost overruns sometimes 2 times or 3 times the actual cost that has been fixed. So, this are the modes of failure for any project to become real time. So, the budget has to be realistic, trustable by the stakeholders, and there requires a justification, and resource estimation also has to be planned. The third important factor is cost control ledger. We need to keep track of the entire cost, how it has been spent, on what it has been spent. The cost control ledger has to be clearly maintained. As I have told, schedule and cost has been 2 important factors. The final factor that we may have to ensure is on the quality. So, quality assurance blueprint is something which is very critical for any software that has to be built, which are measured through a quality criteria. There are several standards which are defined by Software Engineering Institute, IEEE, Project Management Book of Knowledge. Everybody has developed the standards for maintaining the quality of a software, defining the measurable quality criteria and quality practices that ensures all of these at every stage of development of the software. Also, it requires an effective communication strategy specifying meeting cadence, reporting templates, escalation paths and collaboration tools that ensure stakeholders receive timely, accurate information without overload. So, communication between the stakeholder, developer and the entire project team, building up that trust through the way of communication is a very important component of a project manager. The fourth activity that we have to be very clear with the project manager is execution and monitoring. In order to monitor and manage, we need team leadership tactics. It requires motivation, effective delegation, conflict resolution and performance feedback from various stakeholders, end users, developers. People have to be very dynamic, they have to be motivational, so that all of these have been handled at right point in time with the right approach. Now, we may have to track the progress through various metrics. One certain metrics which we will understand early in the project phase development is called earned value analysis, which provides a quantitative measure of project performance. It helps in assessing whether the project is going ahead or behind the schedule and the budget, which is called earned value analysis. Also, we will build up charts called burn down charts, which will visually track progress against planned work. This helps in identifying trends and making adjustments to ensure the project completely stays on track until the task is completed, until the project is completed. Also, the third metric which we will be using quite often is the defect rate. Monitoring the defect rate ensures that the quality is maintained right from the beginning. This involves tracking and resolving issues promptly to deliver high quality product. Also, there could be appropriate changes during the phase of development of the software, and it requires a control protocol, and every time we may have to manage this control mechanism as well. There has been formal change request by some of the stakeholders, and it is to be effectively taken care, documented and reviewed by all of the internal and the external team, and the change control has been impact. So, the impact analysis before we will predict, and after the change has been done, we will also study the impact analysis of the entire project. Risk monitoring has been a crucial phase. There has been a continuous risk management. Periodic risk review meetings, trigger metrics and contingency activation ensure that the risks are monitored and managed throughout the project life cycle. This maintains project's resilience. Finally, the closure and ethics. There has to be a formal acceptance process by the stakeholders, which are done through customer validation test, sign of procedure, record achieving processes. Through the customer validation, the final product meets user requirements, and this involves a rigorous testing and feedback loops to confirm product quality. There are appropriate sign of procedures as well to ensure that all stakeholders approve the final product after going through all of the test phases. This involves obtaining written confirmation of acceptance, completing the project legally and administratively. Also, we may have to record the archiving mechanism, which ensures that the documentation is preserved for future references. This includes the contract that has been signed initially, all the minutes of the meeting that has happened during the phase of development, and other important project artifacts. Post all of this, there has to be a review, post project review. What are the lessons that are learned by way of doing this project? So, there will be a workshop which will make us understand if the project has been successful, if the project has been a failure. We will analyze and articulate on both of this by having a separate workshop with the team that got involved in the project phase. So, the lessons that are learned will be understood, which captures value and insights from the project. This involves discussing the successes, the challenges and the areas of improvement to enhance future projects. Also, there will be metric analysis, which quantitatively and qualitatively decides on the data towards performance. This involves reviewing key metrics to assess project success and identifies the various areas of improvement. Some of the ethical and legal duties are building up an intellectual property respect, data privacy compliance, transparent reporting, professional codes of conduct. These ensures the structure and the way in which the organization, the standards of the organization being maintained, because any specific product that has to be developed, people wanted a trust level that has to be maintained on an organization. There has to be resilience, there has to be trust, there has to be confidentiality that needs to be built with the organization, which completely depends on the employees or the developers who are developing this product. So, there has been a practice of ethical and legal duties that goes in place. And finally, if you ask me a question, what are the career options of a project manager? There are certifications and standards that a project manager will have to go through. Say for example, there is a certification called PMP certification, Prince 2, Scrum Master and IEEE standards are also mapped to different career stages. These credentials also validate the competence and increase the employability for fresh graduates. As I have mentioned you, earlier days, a couple of decades back, people who have gained all these expertise over the years, they only will become a project manager. Now you have heard of these terms where just after 5 years of experience, people who have been creatively good and they exhibit leadership qualities and they have been serving us very good during the phase of development, they become obviously go until the position of CEO in a very early stages of their career. So what requires an essential component of them is there has been executive management program which helps you build all these lifestyles. So apart from that, there has been certifications which actually gives you an awareness of how a project manager has to evolve by doing all these certifications, which enhances the employability of a project manager by following some of the industry's best practices. Also, the same has to be duplicated in their portfolios by having some tips. One, there has to be documenting university projects, what projects that we have been taking up during the university level. You appropriately document it, don't be so elaborate so that you give like a project book. You may have to put all of this into the curriculum vitae, CVs and resumes, wherein you appropriately prepare even a small project that you have done, but with the technology that you have developed and the project coding domain of knowledge. So all of that has to be appropriately put in your CVs, that has to be given for university, starting from university projects, and quantifying the achievements that you have done, how much of time has been saved, how much of cost has been reduced, and the efficiency improvement through various quality metrics makes the portfolio more impactful. This also provides a concrete evidence of value and adds a typical value to the resume. Also, you may have to practice as much of tools as possible and identify which are the effective tools which can help in doing all of these project management activities. So practicing tools like Jira, which is a very good tool, and also MS Projects ensures familiarity with industry standard software. This practical experience complements theoretical knowledge and enhances employability. So as I have rightly mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation itself, the project manager require versatile skills, and these skill sets can be adopted only when you know or you have an awareness of various tools and techniques. But there has been a continuous learning path. With reference to software developers, people who are aspiring to become a project manager, you have to stay up to date with the industry trends. So you have to meet out and talk to various professional bodies like PMI chapters, attending meetups, reading industry blogs, and engaging in MOOCs helps in staying up to date with evolving methodologies and technologies. This ensures continuous professional growth. I am sure students who have been contributing and taking up this course, one thing that you may have to take up for yourself is not just the learning that you had during your engineering program or any program at the graduate and the undergraduate level you go through, but then life is a continuous learning process. So anything that you wanted to adopt, make it continuous learning path, and you have to register yourself into appropriate professional bodies, get up to date knowledge on what kind of software you have, so that up to date knowledge and the technology will help you develop forefront, which makes you to the entire path more successful. Thank you.